All right, so welcome everybody to part 5 of our topic World War II, and today we're actually getting into the war, no more background. And so these are some of the main ideas we'll talk about. We'll look at the Soviet Union for a brief moment. The invasion of Poland will start off World War II, and we'll talk about this tactic Blitzkrieg and why we have a Sitzkrieg, and the Luftwaffe, kind of a funny word, but we'll learn what that's all about. The fall of Western Europe and the fall of France. We'll talk about this miracle at Dunkirk and what collaborators are doing in World War II, and the Battle of Britain, the RAF, and Mr. Churchill himself. So let's get started. A little bit of background. So this is what the world looks like in 1939 as the war breaks out. Our blue nations are Allied powers. Our black nations are, or dark nations are Axis powers, and then the red is just areas where the Soviet Union or communism here in China have a home. So a little bit of background. The Soviet Union will be an Allied power, and I know I gave some in-depth kind of background on Axis powers, so I thought this might be a good opportunity to give a little bit of a background about the Soviet Union. So the Soviet Union comes into existence really in its fullness in 1922 when the Soviet Socialist Republics form. That's what USSR stands for. And we're going to pretty much call it the Soviet Union, although we might use a couple of these terms interchangeably. And the early leader was Lenin, but he dies. And by the 30s, the early 30s, Joseph Stalin has control over the Soviet Union, and he will be a historical example of a dictator, someone who will rule kind of with an iron fist. And the Communist Party controls all aspects of life. It's the government, the economy, and society. This is a totalitarian state in its, I guess, finest form. And those who were viewed as disloyal or resisted the communist powers were sent to gulags, or work camps or work prisons. And we'll see the Soviets will be pretty famous for sending people they don't like away. And so the Soviet Union is a pretty repressive regime. And we'll see Stalin was really paranoid. I read just the other day that he had bulletproof couches so that he could hide behind a couch and be safe. So he did what's called a purge, or basically a massive killing of military officers, anybody he thought was disloyal or could weaken the military or potentially take power from him. So not necessarily a very bright and cheery example in history. And World War II will erupt, with the invasion of Poland. So Poland, smashed right between Nazi Germany and the Soviet Union, will be conquered in 1 month. And that is because they're invaded by two of the most powerful nations at the time. And the Germans will use a new tactic called Blitzkrieg, or lightning war, we'll talk about in just a second, to conquer Poland. So unlike kind of static and stalemate war in World War I, we'll see war will be very quick and strikes fast in World War II. And Britain and France, to defend Poland, declare war on Germany, but really that move is, they can't save Poland, and we'll see why in just a second. But this marks the official start of World War II. I do just want to take a moment to say that that war has been going on between China and Japan for a long time. So if you're talking about the Asian or Pacific theater, that's not really entirely accurate, but that's when most people would say World War II starts. So we'll see that the Polish had very little chance of successfully defending their homeland. They get squashed from 3 sides, from the south, the central, and the north, from Germany, and then the Soviets plow in and they split up the country. They kind of go halvesies on Poland. So pretty bad. I would say Poland, of all nations, gets a pretty bum deal out of World War II. And so this is Blitzkrieg tactics. We can see this kind of graphic that I have here. So first come in the planes. They bomb transportation systems and airfields and power plants, anything that can cripple defense and kind of cause chaos. And then tanks will move in, or armor will move in fast, and they'll drive deep into territory, trying to surround enemies, and then the infantry and the army will come in behind there and what's called mop up resistance and take complete control of the area. And we'll see this is really effective. In particular, the German Luftwaffe, or their Air Force, is really ahead of the curve with air combat, and as well as some of their tanks had kind of a technological advantage compared to some other nations they'll face, at least early in the war. And then there's this strange event from the winter of '39, after Poland's invaded, to the spring of 1940. There'll be what's called a Sitzkrieg, otherwise known as a phony war. But essentially, there's very little conflict between the Axis powers and the Allied powers. And some people will start to say this is a phony war in the press, and some people think Hitler doesn't have a plan on what to do next, and that the war is actually going to be stalled. So we see a little example down there. But we'll see. I read the other day that the French sort of invade Germany just a little bit. They go in, a couple miles, and they capture some German troops, and they don't even know they're at war with France and Britain. So how little is going on during the phony war. But we'll see then war erupts in its fullness in the spring of 1940. We'll see that first Germany will take over Denmark, although give control of the Danes to themselves. But Hitler and the Nazi Germany will be pretty clearly in control of Denmark. We'll talk a little bit more about them when we talk about the Holocaust. Norway has also taken over this kind of nation that has the Atlantic Ocean and the Baltic Sea as its borders. Will be taken over by Nazi Germany in kind of a big surprise. And then in May 1940, the Germans will march through Belgium again, so history does repeat itself sometimes, and also Holland, and both of these lowland countries will be taken over. And then France, the Germans will break through France using Belgium as kind of a highway, as well as they break through the Ardennes forest. But essentially France gets invaded in 1940, and then pretty quickly surrenders, and then the Germans set their sights on Britain, which we'll talk about in just a moment. And then further on, after in the next year, 1941, the Germans will take over Yugoslavia and then also Greece, pretty much controlling, by that point, most of Europe. And it's also worth noting that the Soviets do expand during the same time period. They'll take over what's called the Baltic states. So here, they'll fight Finland and take some land from them, and they'll expand here. Both sides are actively taking over territory and being really aggressive. So in the 1940 spring, Hitler launches another blitzkrieg over Western Europe, and so nation after nation falls, and the Nazis seem to be able to conquer any Allied forces. And there's this small exception is essentially, we talked about this in class, but the Allied troops get surrounded at this port city called Dunkirk. This is right on the coast. You can almost see on a clear day England from there, and 30,000 people have to be evacuated to Britain. But this is a major part of the army of France, and especially England, but also some Belgian troops. But they have to leave everything behind. So this is both probably seen as a defeat because France falls and these guys have to run away, but also maybe a miracle is another interpretation, because these guys are saved. That literally, if these 300,000 people or so surrender, there's almost no one to defend Great Britain, at least who's trained and the right age and able and ready. In addition, France surrenders, and part of France comes under German control, and then part of it is given over to France, what's called Vichy France, and simply because they're collaborating with the Germans. I'll go backwards here in just a second and show you this southern port of France will become what's Vichy France. So they'll be controlled by the French, but ultimately pretty steadily influenced by Germany. Sorry, we got to skip the arrows. All right, so back on, and that leads us to our next thing, is the Germans will set their sights on Britain after conquering all the other Allied powers and even neutral countries, and Britain stands alone, and the Battle of Britain is the first conflict fought entirely in the skies. So this will be an aerial conflict, and so the Royal Air Force has to step up and defend the skies of Britain to prevent a German invasion from the sea. Essentially, the philosophy of the time and ever since then is if you have command of the skies, then you can be really aggressive in attacking a nation. But if you don't control the skies, if you're the opposing force does, it's unwise to move forward and try to invade. But one of the breaks that the British will take is they have technology called radar, which is pretty known to us at the time, but new then. And essentially they could detect when German aircraft were coming, and they had superior designs. The Spitfire and the Hurricane help the British in gaining victory over the Germans. And so for the first time, the Germans are repulsed. They lose, but certainly the British are not in a position to, at least not yet, adequately defeat the Axis powers. And so we see that the British Commonwealth, when we say Britain, we mean just a bunch of other countries as well. So we have our Canadian and our Australian, and I believe that's just a regular old British soldier, but then our Australians, and we have Indian folks, and even those serving in Africa. So certainly this is an international force, but one of the significant factors as war erupts is the leadership of Britain changes into Winston Churchill, and he'll be a funny character we'll talk about throughout our time here, but he'll be really defiant and confident that Britain will stand, and he'll really help the morale of the British people to resist the Axis powers. There's a famous quote here, "We shall defend our island, whatever the cost may be, whatever we shall fight on the beaches, we shall fight on the landing grounds, we shall fight in the fields and in the streets, we shall fight in the hills, we shall never surrender." So really a defiant attitude that comes to define him and the British during this time period. So additionally, so this is kind of what the map looks like as it's labeled, so a little clearer example. And then we'll see that war will get really big as Germany breaks that Nazi-Soviet pact and invades the Soviet Union in June 1941. So really quick, just a little timeline so you get a feel of where we're heading. So Germany invades Poland, right? That starts the war. And then Britain and France declare war only days after. And Germany unleashes the Blitzkrieg on Western Europe and trounces the powers. The Battle of Britain, the Germans are stopped for the first time. And then Germany sets its sights on the Soviet Union. We'll talk about this here in the future, but Pearl Harbor will happen and the U.S. will join the fight, and there'll be some battles in Africa, kind of on the periphery of the conflict, and we'll see this will be the midway of the war, but also probably midway, and marks a series where the Allies start to gain some significant wins in the Battle of Midway. The Germans will lose at Stalingrad, and the Allies will invade Italy, and Italy will actually surrender. Then famously D-Day will be launched. The Battle of the Bulge, the last big fight in Europe. And then VE Day, Victory in Europe, will happen. So the Nazis will fall. And then a series of events, 2 A-bombs in Hiroshima and Nagasaki will give us VJ Day. So just a visual to kind of represent what happened. So in 1940, May, we see a lot of Allied powers around the world, right? And the Axis is, even Italy hasn't joined the fight yet, so some expansion by Nazi Germany and Japan, but we'll see by December 1940 a big change, that the fall of France gives technically Germany a lot of control over parts of Africa, and we'll see most of Europe is under Nazi and Italian control, and the Japanese begin to spread their influence as well. And so just a review, so Joseph Stalin is the leader of the Soviet Union.